Good morning, Ed here from Crystal Clear Aquatics. I'm here on site today starting my first proper sort of construction job of the year, and that is the restoration and the redesign of a cascade on this pond. So the brief for this job is there's an original existing cascade on the pond, as you can see. Only half of it really retains water, and you can see the other half here is running dry. With the whole cascade running, there was quite a large loss of water in the pond. So we've kind of, through a process of elimination, worked out that the lower section of the cascade was working okay, and that there was an issue towards the rear of the cascade. But it's such a large portion of it which would need repair work that we just as well restore the whole cascade, and in the process redesign the feature and create something a little bit cosmetically more appealing. And this is a fantastic sort of position for a cascade on this pond. We've got a lovely natural slope, a nice rockery here which we can build up with some stonework and create plenty of drop, plenty of elevation. So this is going to be completely dismantled and taken apart, all of the old stonework removed, a certain amount of excavation and sort of redigging to reshape and move the cascade ever so slightly. It won't be going back quite as far as it did once. It's going to end up stopping sort of central by this large plant in the centre of the border here. Doesn't need to be quite so vertical as this either. We've got such a difference of elevation here from the surface of the pond to the soil level that we can create some nice falls and drops and potentially even a little pool of water within the cascade as well. Now, a year or two ago, I re-edged this side of the pond. So you can see here that this is horsham stone along the edge of the pond here. And there are some larger, blockier pieces of purbeck all around the edge of the pond. Now, much of the larger stuff is going to be left alone, but you can see that a lot of the purbeck over the years has been affected by the winter freeze-thaw, and a lot of it has split. That's going to come out. And we'll try and tie in a cascade with this edge, the new edge of the pond that's been built, by using again horsham stone. York stone would tie in nicely as well, but as I'm local to the horsham stone quarry, I should be picking up some rock from there. So plenty to get on with today. It's been a little while since I've done any proper manual labour, so this is going to kind of break me in gently. A week ago today, we had snow at about -4. And today it's 16 degrees and it feels really warm. This is very typical British weather. So I'm in the throes of dismantling the cascade and some of the rockery stones around the edge. I'm going to be moving the position of the cascade slightly more central, and I want the cascade itself to be deeper down within the soil rather than sort of sat on top. In the process of removing some of the stones in the old cascade, I've actually discovered an old wall, or a foundation of a wall here, which perhaps once upon a time was what retained this rockery area. This is no longer going to be stone, it's not going to be cascade, it's going to be sort of given over to planting. So it's important that I get rid of this concrete and the brickwork so that there's scope and space to put plants in. But at the same time I need to do something to shore up all of this soil and to retain the rockery area, and I need to be able to make sure that I can build it up high enough that I'm sort of looking level across to the other side of the cascade. If one side is a lot higher than the other and the whole thing's kind of on a slant, it will look a little bit weird. So I like to try and make sure that either side of the cascade is relatively level. So I've got a few big stones and bits and pieces. I'm just digging out an area here so that I can start to put some nice stones back here to build up a natural retainer rather than the old brick wall that was here and then sort of concealed with soil. That'll hold everything back, and it'll mean that there's more scope for planting in the future. And when you're bedding rocks and bits and pieces into the soil, you want to dig it out, make sure you've got a nice firm sort of bed to sit the rock on, and try and slope it slightly so the rock is leaning into the slope, and that's going to give it a little bit more strength. So I've got a big rock in mind. Let's see if I can fit it in there. Right, needs a little bit more work in shaping that, but that should go in there nicely. Whoever invented these little short tools, you're a genius. Fantastic for digging and scraping around in the ground on your knees, which I seem to spend an awful lot of my time doing. It's good for your back as well. Good. We'll get that levelled up, backfill with a bit of soil behind it. There's scope to plant up in front with some little alpines, some succulent sedums, which we've got lots of here already, and then I can backfill behind it. And this is going to allow me to make sure I've got a retainer to dig out to create my falls. Now, rocks like this in a rockery inevitably are going to be handy kind of stepping stones to stand on, leap around when you're doing a bit of weeding and maintenance. So you want to make sure that the rocks themselves are well bedded in, stable, really pack down the soil around the rock nicely, and take the opportunity to have a look from various different angles. You know, don't be focused right here what's in front of you. I'm taking a walk around the garden in various positions, keeping an eye on the angle and the fall of the stone to make sure that it blends in with everything else, and that it will tie in with the cascade that I'll be building. Good, that feels nicely bedded in. There we go. So we've got quite a slope down here towards the grass, so this is doing a good job of holding back and retaining all of this soil. And it's nice to be able to reclaim and use some of the materials that are already here. You know, a lot of this stone is really nicely weathered. It's got a nice natural kind of patina of moss and lichen and discoloration, and that's nice when you're building something like this. You don't want to bring in too much new stone because it does look very new and very stark, and it'll take a little while to establish. You know, in the trade, a lot of people talk about painting rocks with yogurt or cream or milk to try to green them up and to encourage moss to grow very quickly. Not sure I'd be keen on the smell, but I'm sure it would work. Now, when you're doing something like this, it's a really good idea to try and clear away a much larger area than you think you're going to need. The cascade itself, you know, it's not going to be particularly large in length or in width. It's going to be, you know, built to kind of fit in with the scale of the pond. So again, we're not talking about, you know, Niagara Falls here. It's just going to be a nice trickle over a series of drops and rocks. But we don't want to be too confined or too contained, so it's great if you can clear an area much larger than you need and start with a clean slate. And then as you're digging and putting stonework down and the whole project can evolve organically, you're not going to be too restricted to certain areas, and you've got the freedom to move around. And then it's very simple afterwards to backfill with soil and plant up around it so that the feature looks like it's part of the rockery and not sort of sitting on top or being governed by all the rocks that were here originally. Now, as I've been working my way along and removing the stonework, I've been very careful to hang on to some of the alpines and plants and bits and pieces that have been growing in amongst all the stonework. Some of them might look like weeds or pretty nondescript, but it's worth hanging on to all of this because you're not sure what you're going to want to keep when you put it all back. And it's little plants like this which don't look an awful lot at the minute, but once you've built the cascade and you've got little nooks and crannies that you can start to embed things like this in, it's going to very quickly soften the stonework and make it look a lot more natural and a lot more established. So I want to hang on to all this So you can see I've sort of scraped out an initial impression of the new cascade. A series of sort of falls working its way around towards the plastic bag you can see at the back there. So it's a similar kind of length to what was originally still running, but it's broadened, it's a bit wider. Now I've deliberately made it larger so that I can put the stonework down and then start to backfill with soil around it to make the whole lot sort of blend in and look a little bit more natural. This is about the level that I want or I can imagine the water to flow. So the surface of the water over the cascade is going to be lower than the surrounding ground level, and that's going to help to keep it looking natural. But once I start putting stonework on top of there, and over each sort of fall there's going to be a flat stone or what's called a spill stone, that's going to raise that level up to something which I think is a little bit, perhaps a bit more unnatural than I'd like it to be. So I'm going to dig down now another couple of inches over each terrace and work with a level this time, so I can make sure that I've got everything nice and level. So that's the basic template of the cascade dug out, and now what's left to do is to measure up, get an idea of how much pond underlay and pond liner I need, go and pick up some rock and some building materials, and off we go. Now what's great here is that the original pond liner had been left in position, so there's a nice overlap for me to overlay with the new membrane. And that's very important, and that helps to make sure that there's not going to be any potential risk of water sort of capillary action or any sort of flowing going back underneath that final spill stone and potentially leaking. So it's always a good tip when you're building a pond, make sure you leave a reasonable overlap if you're planning on doing a cascade. So I'm going to have a measure up just using a piece of string laid down following the contours of the cascade all the way around, and I shall measure the length and the width and the approximate depth. And you always need more liner than you think, so I'll go slightly larger than required and get building. So I'm actually using my flexible measure here instead of a piece of string. This is supple enough and it will do the job. Now I'm making sure that the piece of pond liner I'm using for the cascade is sufficiently long enough to start in the pond itself. There's a shelf here which is going to be really convenient to build up some foundation stones onto which the initial kind of spill stone is going to sit. And I want the main pond liner for the cascade to sit underneath all of that and make sure it reaches right down into the pond. So I'm making sure I've got a good overlap of at least 30 centimetres of excess liner which is going to start off in the pond, and that can always be trimmed off later on if there's too much, but it's really important that you've got that proper overlap. And I'm just going to start to lay pieces of stone to hold the tape down so I can work my way along each contour. And you want to be measuring the central portion of the cascade and make sure you get the longest sort of linear length. And then again, make sure you've given yourself enough excess at the back as well. So I'm going to lay that out, see what I've got. And as they say, measure twice and cut once. So I'll do it again just to make sure. And then I'll repeat that process at the widest point of the falls. Obviously, if you've got a really, really wide cascade at one section and then it becomes much, much thinner in another section, there's going to be a fair amount of wastage of pond liner. You want to do it out of one piece ideally. You don't want lots of little pieces sort of overlapping, so you have to measure the widest point, of course. So for this cascade I'm going to require a piece of liner 3 meters in length by 1.8 meters in width. Now I'm hoping that 3 meters generally is kind of a standard size on the roll, so I should be able to get a 3 meter width roll and then have 1.8 meters. So there's going to be very little or no wastage whatsoever. It may be that I have to go with a 3x2, we'll see. It's very easy to work out from that how much pond underlay you're going to need. Just work out square meters, so 3x2, 6 square meters, so 6 square meters of pond fleece. And it doesn't matter what sort of measurements you get with that, as long as you've got 6 square meters, because you'll be cutting it up into strips and sections to work your way around the falls. I always like to use some additional pond fleece or some offcuts of pond liner to make sure I cushion any stonework which is going to be sitting on top of the main pond liner. So essentially it's going to be ground, pond fleece, the main pond membrane, and then another layer of fleece or pond liner. Now I'm going to be building up this cascade using expanding foam rather than cement or mortar. There's a well-established pond here, there's a lot of livestock in the pond, it's quite a small volume of water, and if I were to build up this size of cascade using mortar, there's probably going to be issues with lime content and other sort of corrosive chemicals from the cement harming the fish. It's not something which is going to be walked on or have sort of heavy traffic, so expanding foam is going to be absolutely fine to hold the stonework into position, to make sure that the water isn't going to seep underneath the stonework, but it's going to flow over the top. And most importantly, it's non-toxic. It's not going to cause any issues to the water chemistry at all, as it's inert. So a very convenient product to use. So it's time to do some shopping. Right, picked up the pond liner, and now I've just got to the Horsham Stone Quarry to go and pick up some rocks and materials for the job. So you can see, I've just got a big pile of rock to wander around, and I shall pick up and look for some interesting pieces which are going to work well with my cascade. Horsham stone's a really nice stone to work with, splits nice and easily, comes away in these nice sort of finish blocky pieces that are really good for wall building and particularly for cascades, and it's got a really nice natural kind of buff creamy colour, so it works really well with water and with surrounding planting and foliage. So it's one of my favourite rocks to use around ponds. It's going to take a little while. Load up my bag, load up my van, and then I've got to take it back. You can see it's covered in this sort of dirt and clay residue, so it'll need a really good clean before I can start to use it. So this is the hard bit of the graft. Well, good morning, it's day 2 of the job. Yesterday I finished up at the Horsham Stone Quarry hand selecting some various pieces of stone for the job, and I got them brought up here. So this is a selection of some rockier, sort of blockier pieces of Horsham stone, and this is going to tie in with the edge of the pond that I put in a couple of years ago. It's a bit dusty, a bit mucky, full of this clay, sort of dirt and debris, which is going to have to be jet washed off, so all these stones are going to get a really good rinse, and then it will reveal the lovely riven sort of texture and the colours of the stonework. I've also brought up some flatter pieces of stone. Some of these are a combination of York stone and again a little bit more Horsham stone. The flatter pieces of stone make fantastic spilled stones over which the water pours and trickles into the pond, and they're also quite useful to create the sort of riverbed or the base of the stream. And then the rockier, blockier pieces of stone will form the sort of peripheral edges. So when you're doing jobs like this, you want to have an excess of rock. You need to have more than you need so that you can pick out all the bits and pieces that fit. It works a little bit like a natural kind of jigsaw puzzle. You're never not quite sure what's going to go together. So you need to have more rock to choose from to get all the good bits. And it's also really handy to have a combination of different sizes. You don't want anything too uniform or too similar. When I'm choosing stone, I'm deliberately looking for some of the interesting pieces which have got ribbon edges and little steps and natural falls that I think would look natural with water flowing over the top of them. And different sizes of stones as well. It's amazing how many little sort of filler stones you need to start to fill up the joints and the cracks. So I've got a lot to get on with today. I need to drain the level of the pond down about 6 inches so I can reveal the shelf onto which the first foundation stones are built. and then that lower spill stone will sit, and then from there I can build my way up towards the back of the cascade. I need to put the pond liner down, pond fleece, and start to build it. So less chit chat and more work. So all the rock has been washed, and I've piled it up into various different piles of different grades and sizes depending on what kind of use I think it's going to be useful for. I've drained the level of the pond down sufficiently that I can get down to the first initial shelf, which is what the first spill stone is going to be sitting on. I've got my pond liner. Here I'm using a 0.75mm rubber green seal pond liner, so it's a nice compromise between being slightly thicker than the thinner PVC, not quite as thick as the 1mm firestone that I use for some of the bigger ponds, but this is more flexible and it's going to be easier to lay this over the contours of the cascade. And it's nice and stretchy and sort of malleable. I've got my heavy duty pond fleece. This is a 250 GSM, so the thicker grade pond fleece. And I'm going to lay the pond fleece down first, then the pond liner, and then I've got offcuts of old pieces of pond liner from other jobs that I cut up, and I use that as the barrier between the stonework and then the pond liner to act as a protective layer. So now the fun bit starts and I can begin the construction. Snack time. What wonders do we have today? Nice white fish and couscous. My bid to be healthy, burn off my winter excesses. Right, I'm resorting to head cam now, and I'm going to start to fix some of the stonework I've laid. You can see here that I've built up dry stone, just the lower portion of the cascade, working out some of the spills where the water's going to pour over. I'm being careful as I go to use a pond level and make sure that I make reference to the maximum height of the pond and the fall of the spill stone, because I need to make sure that, of course, we've got a certain drop. And the spill stone doesn't want to be lower or too low in order not to create the fall. And I'm happy with the position and the layout of this stonework, so I'm now going to fix this into place. Now I'm using a Waza foam fix, sometimes called rock fix as well, which is essentially an expanding foam. It's a non-toxic, inert substance which isn't going to affect the water quality like the mortar would if I was cementing this. And as you can see, it's quite a lot of stonework in relation to a small volume of water, so we don't really want to use too much of anything which is going to alter the water chemistry in any way. And the foam fix, you buy it. You have a little white straw. I'm just looking for one, but I don't seem to have one. A little white straw that comes with a pack, so you can use it just like it is with the straw, but they're not very good. Much better to use a proper sort of professional foam gun applicator like this. This is a foam gun, and the rock foam just screws in on top, and then you can work your way around squirting this stuff in all the cracks and the nooks and crannies. Now this really does expand and increase in volume massively, so you don't want to get too trigger happy with this and use too much of it, because give it 20 minutes, half an hour, and all of this stuff is going to start expanding out of the gaps. Now if it becomes very visible, there's a few little tricks you can do. You can plug it with a few stones, but once it starts to develop a skin over the top, you can start to push it down inside and sort of disguise it that way. I'm making sure that the spill stones themselves are relatively level. That one's perfect, and with a slight decline down into the pond, and that one's level, slightly sloping down to the pond, so that's fine. And that means that I'm going to get a nice fall of water into the pond, ensuring that the pond liner itself extends right down into the pond and comes up sufficiently higher than either side edging stone. And then when this is finished, I can trim all this back and conceal it. But it's really important, you've got to have a good margin of error, some good tolerance here between what will be maximum water level and the height of the pond liner. So I'm just working my way around. And then this stuff, when it dries, forms a nice hard skin. Get lots in there. So you'll be amazed at how far this stuff does go. And most importantly, you're using this not just to fix and anchor the stonework, but to make sure that you can control where the water's flowing. If I leave this as it is dry stone, very little of the water is going to pour over the top of this. Most of it we're going to lose down the gaps at the sides. So that's where this stuff really comes in handy. If you happen to accidentally get any on the stonework, you can clean it off. Wire brush, but it's a bit of a pain. And I'm wearing waders here. It's not really something you want to get on your clothes either, because it's quite difficult to get off. I ruined a couple of pairs of trousers last year doing this. If you do get it on the rock, as I've just done here, don't try and clean it off now. Wait till it dries and you can just pick it off. Now some of these stones I've positioned here I'll need to remove. Well, maybe I won't with that one. Depends how much gap you've got. Oh, there's a good gap underneath here. Some of them you need to lift off, put a big splodge of this foam and then stick it back on again. Now once this is all gone off, all this area here and the visible liner will then be concealed with a scattering of some small pebbles or bits of gravel or some chippings from the stone. And again, any visible foam will be concealed that way as well. Very handy to have a selection of little filler stones to hand that you can sort of plug up any gaps. And that will really help to get all that foam to stick. Good. Right, I'm going to work my way around, fix this lot, and then carry on building the next section. So you can see the foam is starting to expand noticeably out through the joints. This has been about sort of 10 minutes since I first started spraying it. I'll give it another 10 minutes or so until it starts to develop a slightly firmer skin, and then I'll start pushing it and manipulating it back into all those cracks and joints. So building up the cascade now, my sort of technique, I don't really have one. It's just finding stones that feel right, that I like the look of, and that complement the whole feature. So it really is a natural jigsaw. There's lots of toing and froing and grabbing rocks and spinning them around and seeing how they look, and then trying something else. I'm very conscious of how high the side of the ground is next to a rock. You know, I don't want to have the rocks too much higher than the surrounding ground level, and ideally we want the edging of the stones to be slightly lower to make it look more natural. I've got offcuts of liner which I just lay down here to provide a little bit of cushioning. and then I can safely put down my rocks like so. Nope, don't like that one. Let's try this one. Now the edging stones will dictate the position and the angle and the flow, and what I want to achieve are some meanders and some sort of zigzags. So things like this, I can pull the liner in and actually reclaim some of the border. A rock is never going to look as nice as a plant, so I want to make sure that we can get some plants and some foliage right up tight against the rockwork and get these things to sort of grow over and conceal this lot. And eventually, given time, most of the top of the stonework will be concealed, and you'll just be left with sort of some of the faces pocketed amongst little plants and mosses and bits and pieces. Now I need to keep getting out and looking at it from different angles and checking the position of the stone. By the time I put a rock down here, that might be a bit restrictive, but we shall see. Let's try this one over here. And then once I've got it in a certain position, I'll wedge it with a few smaller chock stones just to kind of hold it in place, and then I'll go and have a look and see what it looks like. Well, that's the end of a long day. I'm pleased with progress. That's the whole kind of structure, the skeleton of the cascade built. There's a lot of tidying up to do tomorrow. A few rocks that are stained with a bit of the black foam that will just have to be scraped off with a wire brush. A few areas where I need to repack with a little bit more, and some smaller kind of chock stones. Tomorrow we get to fire it up and we get to see what it looks like with some water running down it. It's day 3 on the job, and what will essentially be the last day of this project. You can see that the cascade has been completed. I've added some dressing gravel and a few stones and bits and pieces. I'll have to add a few other little bits and pieces just to hide any visible black foam. There was a little bit of stain on some of the rocks up near the top, which I shall be wire brushing off. And now I am in the process of giving it a good wet test and a run, so we can monitor the flow of the water and where it goes, make sure that all the water flows over the spilled stones as it should do, and if it doesn't, we can start to plug up certain areas behind the stones. Let's turn it on and see what it looks like. Here it comes. So there's a little bit of seepage underneath the spilled stones, but the vast majority of it is going over, so that's absolutely fine. That's a nice flow. Yeah, I'm pleased with that. It's a nice sound as well. Eventually, over time, once the plants are established, we need to conceal a lot of the side stonework. so that the focal point is the centre of the cascade, the moving water, and a bit with the darker rocks, with a few bits of stone sort of poking out amongst the plants, making it look a lot more natural. So this is the fun bit really. This is where everything really starts to come together. Cutting back all of the pond liner, all of the visible man-made material, moving earth around and putting some of the stones and plants back. Yeah, I'm pleased with that. Well, that's the cascade completed. Now I've got the painful bit, all the tidying up to do. Well, that's it. Job done. 3 days of labour to get to where we are now. As always, it's going to take a few months, the remainder of the season really, to establish and to start to soften and look more natural. And as always, it's the planting here which is really, really key. I'm looking forward to all of that later on in the summer to see when some of the area has been planted up. Charlie, don't keep your heart out. I'm Ed, Aquatics. See you on the next pond.